Good morning, class. Welcome back to ELA. Today we are going to be doing a lesson on bounty hunters, which is another name for the slave chasers or slave catchers who would hunt for runaway slaves for reward money. So yesterday we listened to chapter 6 in our book, Harriet Tubman. And in this chapter, we learned that Harriet went back to Maryland 20 times. And each time she brought more slaves north to freedom. But this work was very dangerous. Do you guys remember why this work was so dangerous? So I want you guys to think about what was so dangerous about what Harriet was doing, rescuing slaves, runaway slaves. So right now I want you guys to listen to a part of chapter 6 that I'm going to read aloud that reviews some of the dangers that the runaway slaves faced. So I'm going to present my screen to you so you guys can look at the article. Or I'm sorry, not the article, the excerpt from chapter 6. So right now I'm going to read it out loud, and I want you guys to be thinking about the dangers that the runaway slaves faced. So chapter 6 excerpt right here. There were white men who made their living by chasing after runaway slaves. The slave owners offered thousands of dollars in rewards to anyone who could catch Harriet. If they did catch her, they would kill her. Harriet had to carry a gun and wear disguises so that the slave chasers would not know her. Sometimes she dressed like a man. Sometimes she dressed like an old woman. Harriet was very smart about keeping away from the slave chasers. When she took slaves away from their masters, she would always start on the weekend. That way, the master would not notice that they were gone for a few days. Often, the slave owners put up posters of the runaway slaves. Then the slave chaser would know what they looked like. Harriet would pay someone to go around and pull the posters down. Okay, so that is from chapter 6. You guys would have already listened to that in the audiobook presentation. So let's review. Why was Harriet's work so dangerous? So we learned that there were slave catchers. So these slave catchers were offered reward money. So the masters offered large rewards, so that motivated the slave catchers to go out looking for runaway slaves to bring back to their masters. And if the slaves were caught, they would be beat and even sometimes killed. So some slaves would be killed when they were captured. Masters posted runaway slave signs with either their pictures or a description of what they looked like so that the slave catchers would know who they were looking for. So since the posters had descriptions of Harriet, she would wear disguises, and she also carried a gun for protection. Okay, so now I'm going to read you guys the article Bounty Hunters that has some information about these slave catchers. So as I'm reading, I want you guys to think about, why did people want to catch runaway slaves? So what were their reasons for wanting to catch the runaway slaves? And also, what happened to the slaves that people caught? All right, so now we are going to read the fantastic facts about bounty hunters. You guys follow along while I read out loud, and then you'll also reread on your own before you answer the questions. Catching slaves who ran away. Slave masters in the South were cruel, and they never paid slaves for their work. Some slaves tried to escape, but running away was dangerous. If slaves got caught, they would be whipped or even killed. Some people tried to catch the runaway slaves to make money. There's a picture of a slave who's been whipped, so you see the scars on his back. And there's some slaves trying to run away from slave catchers who are chasing them on horseback. Bounty hunters kidnapped runaway slaves and took them back south. So when the bounty hunters, the slave catchers, when they would catch the runaway slaves, they would bring them back south to return them to their masters. That way they would be able to get their reward money. Slave owners paid money, which is also known as a bounty, for bringing back a runaway slave. So that's why we call them bounty hunters, because the reward money was called a bounty. So they were hunting for a bounty for money. This is an example of an actual reward sign for a runaway slave. It says $100 reward. Ran away from the subscriber on the 27th of July. My Black woman named Emily, 17 years of age, well grown, black color, has a whining voice. She took with her one dark calio and one blue and white dress, a red quartered gingham bonnet, a white striped shawl, and slippers. I will pay the above reward if taken near the Ohio River on the Kentucky side, or $300 if taken in the state of Ohio and delivered to me near Lewisburg, Mason County, Kentucky. August 4th, 1853. So as you can see, he didn't have a picture of his slave Emily, but he described what she looked like, what she would be wearing, and what she had with her so that they would be able to spot her. Bounty hunters also kidnapped African Americans who had never been slaves. These people were then sold as slaves. Wow. So oftentimes these bounty hunters, they also just kidnapped free Black men and women who were never slaves, and then they would sell them into slavery. So these slave catchers, these bounty hunters, they were very cruel. So they were not nice people. Okay. So now you guys are going to reread your bounty hunter article and then answer your questions. All right, good job.